Well, to quote the great Ron Burgundy, that escalated quickly. The New York Jets offseason is officially underway as the Jets make one of their first moves, and it's a big one. And a little bit surprising, I think, for a lot of Jet fans when you really think about it. I know a lot of Jet fans are clamoring for this move, but the Jets have officially cut Laken Tomlinson from the position. He is gone from the Jets. A disappointing signing for Joe Douglas. We can get in all the basics, but how does it affect the Jets? Could something have happened behind the scenes that led to this? But there is a lot to dissect with Laken Tomlinson's cutting. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rich Sports Talk, your home for the latest and greatest on the New York Jets. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a lot to talk about. Of course, the breaking news, Jets cutting Laken Tomlinson. The big news out of that, they save $8.1 million and now have $24 million in the cap right now and have the potential to work up to close to 50 or 45 million if they can renegotiate a couple of contracts and restructure a few contracts. But the big news is Laken Tomlinson is gone. So now the Jets officially only have two offensive linemen from last year's starting five still on the team, AVT and Joe Tippmann. Although a lot of Jet fans would say, is that the worst thing in the world? I have a lot of thoughts, a lot of theories. I know you do too. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're joining us after the live stream, make sure to comment. If you're joining us doing this live stream, also make sure to give us a like, give us a comment, subscribe, and also give your thoughts. We will get to your questions in a little bit. But my initial thoughts on the Laken Tomlinson signing was I think the timing of this is what really caught me off guard. I was of the opinion that Laken Tomlinson was going to be a Jet for at least a little while into the offseason. It kind of felt that Laken was going to be a guy where if the Jets could have upgraded the position, then they would clear him to save cap. But this move sends a lot of messages. Number one, it sends the message that the Jets are cutting a lot of fat. It also sends that they are trying to redo their cap and get in a position to attract some free agencies. And I also think it shows that Joe Douglas is not showing loyalty to guys he has paid, because this was Joe Douglas's big sign as his tenure with the Jets. And at the time, I thought it was a slam dunk. You had a guy that was entering his prime as an offensive guard. You have someone that was incredibly durable, still incredibly durable, 114 consecutive starts, but just the performance wasn't there. Now, the question is, who's to blame for the performance? Is it on Laken Tomlinson? Is it more on the Jets? Now, on the Tomlinson side, I don't think Tomlinson played well with the Jets. You look at the tape, there's plenty of times he got beat, but a lot of the times I also look at too is if he had stability at left tackle, how would he have been? Because you look at what the Jets have gone through in the 2 years between George Fant, Mekhi Becton, Juwan Brown, even Max Mitchell at times, Billy Turner. I mean, it has been a revolving door at left tackle, and you wonder if that continuity is going to hurt. And the one thing I'm curious too is I believe the Jets went to Tomlinson to likely ask for a pay cut, and he probably went to his agent and said, what do you think I can get on the open market? And whether it's right or wrong, Tomlinson and his agent believe they can go out there and get more money than the Jets were going to offer them to negotiate. And look, there could be a market for Laken Tomlinson. It's not often that guards just drop out of the sky that start 114 consecutive games. And I do think there will be a team that will look at on it and go, it was more the Jets. We can get them on the cheap. We can have an opportunity to plug and play. And look, I know a lot of Jet fans hated Laken Tomlinson. I was a little bit, to be honest with you, on the fence about keeping Tomlinson. I was of the opinion, keep him until you had a better option. But it's clear that the Jets have plans in place. And now the curious thing that I have about all of this is what's going on in the Jets building. Because I'd hate to say this, but a couple weeks ago, I did a whole show about moving Joe Tippmann to guard. Weeks ago. Before it's become kind of a bit of a trending topic in the last week in Jets circles. But I said if I was the Jets, I would approach Joe Tippmann about playing guard and about being a starting guard, and if he would prefer playing guard. You have to remember when Joe Tippmann was coming out, many people in the scouting community thought he actually would be a better guard in the NFL because of his size. And the reason for that is he's 6'6". He's a really tall center. And if you notice with centers, you kind of want them on a little bit of the short side so they can get those leverage against those D tackles. Not to say Tippmann wasn't good against the interior, but I thought he played a really good guard. Now, this tells me one thing in particular, this cut. The Jets know who's playing one of their guard positions, because I cannot fathom this team making this move and saying we're moving AVT to right tackle, we're keeping Joe Tippmann at center, and we're going to try to find two guards. Now, in theory, it is easier to find two guards than two starting tackles. But I have this feeling that the Jets, whether they went to Joe Tippmann and asked Joe Tippmann and Joe Tippmann agreed to move to guard, or whether it was that they're going to keep AVT at right guard at full time, which was his best position despite his ability to play the tackle position. This to me tells me the Jets already have penciled in one of their starting guards, because it does not make any sense to me that this team is moving on from a starting caliber guard. Now, maybe they've had discussions with Connor McGovern, and maybe they feel that worst case scenario, McGovern could be a swing guard, at least until they sign someone. I've been on basically on the last episode I did was about guys I would keep, guys I would release. And he was one of them. I'd keep Connor McGovern, especially if you can get him on the league minimum. I think he's a versatile center. I think you can play him inside. You can play him at the guard positions. But to me, this tells me the Jets have made a decision. They're either playing AVT at a guard position or they're playing Joe Tippmann at a guard position. Now, other things that this deal impacts, one big one in particular, is Bryce Huff. Because it's been reported that Bryce Huff is not taking a pay cut. And Bryce Huff is not taking a hometown discount. That Bryce Huff wants north of $20 million. Well, look at that. All of a sudden, the Jets have in this early negotiating window over $20 million to negotiate with him. So I do think Huff will be a priority to an extent. I think the Jets are going to come in with a modest offer. And if that doesn't work, they at least now have some room to franchise tag and trade him. But I also don't think the Jets are done by any stretch. Because the Jets, you look at certain contracts, John Franklin Myers has a big cap hit. They could rework that contract and get that number down. CJ Mosley has a massive cap hit. The Jets, I do think, are going to rework that cap hit. You wonder if maybe they take Quinnen Williams and change that cap number and put it down the road a little bit. Maybe they work on getting DJ Reed an extension this offseason, Michael Carter II an extension, and making it so it's a heavier back end deal and taking some money off of the front end of that deal. And also, if they're able to move on from Zach Wilson, that will likely clear up at least another $5 to $6 million. CJ Uzomah is likely a cut. He clears off about $5.3 million. You look right now, John Frank Myers, if the Jets were to cut him, would be $7 million, but I think they're going to renegotiate that contract. Laken Tomlinson was really the biggest cap saving that the team could have out of CJ Mosley. And basically, I don't think they're going to cut Mosley, but I do think they're going to renegotiate the Mosley contract. But the big thing now is they have the money to offer Huff. Before, they didn't. Now, with the cap going up, and now with this move, the Jets have some money. Now, the other question then pivots to, well, where do they go in free agency? This is a very good guard free agency class. I personally love Hunt from the Dolphins. There's a lot of good interior offensive linemen. Like, let's be honest, the strength of this free agency class is the interior offensive line. Maybe the Jets have 2 or 3 guys that they are confident they are going to sign in this free agent window to replace the guard. Because the one thing that I am concerned about, and I know Laken wasn't a great addition and people were sour on his play. The one thing you worry about with that play, though, is how much was it the offensive line just all around being terrible and the left tackle being terrible. But the one thing Laken Tomlinson brought you was durability. You couldn't say that about AVT. You can't say that about Mekhi Becton. You can't say that about Dwayne Brown. You can't say that pretty much about anyone on the Jets offensive line except maybe Joe Tippmann, but he's played 1 season in the NFL. Laken Tomlinson was durable. And I know the argument, well, he wasn't good. Well, you know what? He was a hole that the Jets didn't have to fill. But obviously now this is a hole that the Jets have to fill. And obviously the Jets must have confidence that, A, they are guys in this draft that they can plug and play in the middle rounds. There are guys in free agency that they are confident they can bring in. They already have made up in their mind that AVT or Tippmann are going to be the starting guard, or maybe even guards. That could be a potential possibility as well. But to me, if I was the Jets, obviously we will want to hear more about what happened with all this. I know a lot of the beat reporters are surprised, especially the durability. To me, really think that this was a move that was really surprising. And look, I give Joe Douglas a lot of credit because this was his big move. This was arguably his biggest free agency signing as a general manager. And he's sending a message to this locker room that, look, no one is safe. And granted, Laken Tomlinson did not play as a Pro Bowl player. And at the time, I thought it was a great move. I thought the Jets got a great guard who was in his 20s, ascending player, played in this system, a Pro Bowl player. It just didn't work out. And as much as I love free agency, I know football fans, we love free agency. It's the free agency frenzy. Outside of maybe wide receivers, the gamble you always take in free agencies, you see a player work in a system, work with teammates around him, work under a certain coach. How's he going to work in other places? And this is a classic example where you see a really great player in one system, in one scheme on a great team, go to a lesser team, have to have a more expanded role, and it doesn't work out. So as much as I think the Jet fans are excited about free agency, and I think that they should be, I think that the Jets need to improve this team more through the draft and smart free agency signings, like a DJ Reed type of signing, someone that's more of a day two sign than overpaying up front, maybe overpaying on a one-year deal for a wide receiver. But the way the market is trending right now with the wide receivers, of course, T. Higgins was Hag. It doesn't look too promising for the wide receivers. But I'm also curious, too, as do the Jets have certain targets? Because one of the things I took out of the Senior Bowl was there was a lot of offensive linemen in this draft. There was a lot of good offensive linemen, especially guards and centers, on day two of this draft. And I think the Jets maybe are looking at their board and saying, we're probably going to get a tackle in round one, but maybe we double dip. We do what we did back when we drafted both DeBrick and Nick Mangold. We go two offensive linemen back to back, belly to belly, and build this offensive line. And maybe that's what they're looking at, a tackle in the first round and an interior offensive lineman. Now, again, ideally, you don't want to start two rookies, but if they're talented enough, you do it. And the one other thing I'm curious too is because there are internal discussions. Is there a chance Becton's coming back? I really do not think Becton's coming back. But if Becton says, look, I'll play right tackle and I'll take a cheap one-year deal to try to prove to everyone that last year that I can stay healthy and really cash out the end of this year and play a great year with Aaron Rodgers, maybe. But to me, that's a little bit of wishful thinking. But overall, I think this was a smart move. Again, I'm more surprised by the timing. I was of the opinion personally that if I was the Jets, I would have waited into free agency, waited to see if maybe you could at least get something in free agency, pull off a deal. But maybe they also did this as well to tell free agencies, because it's one thing to say to free agency, you're going to be a starting guard, but if Laken Tomlinson's there, well, who's playing? Now, all of a sudden, there's a guard opening, and now the Jets, before this free agency tampering period opens up, can start reaching out to agents and saying, hey, we have a vacancy at left or right guard. Is your guy interested? So I'm really curious to see what they will do there. There's, of course, the really good interior offensive lineman for the Titans that I could see the Jets bring in, plug in at guard. There's some options, but let's get to your questions. Again, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Breaking news, of course. Braden, I want Jackson Powers Johnson, AVT at left guard, Timmon at right guard. Here's the thing, Braden. I think, if anything, if you're going to keep AVT at a guard, he's going to stay right guard. That's where he's been. I think you can move Timmon to left. I have been a proponent of, I really want Jackson Powers Johnson. I love the kid. I would be hard-pressed. Like, if he is somehow sitting there on day two, and there's a chance, because for whatever reason, centers tend to not have the value that I think they should, I would be sprinting to the podium. Now, again, the only scenarios I see the Jets getting Jackson's Power Johnson are two of the following. And Jet fans might not like to hear this, but here they are, Braden. They're number one. They trade down in the draft, get maybe a lesser tackle, and then draft him at the top of the second round by the second round pick that they got for the trade back. Or, you're probably not going to like this either, they deal Huff after a franchise tag for a second round pick. Like, that's, to me, if you're going to get Jackson Powers Johnson, that's how you're getting him. Now, granted, I would love him on the Jets. That kid is someone that my eyes pop whenever I watch that kid on film, and he's got a great punch. But overall, I mean, I'd love that interior, but again, you also got to worry about the tackles. as well. Let's get to Jacob Super Cooper. Great move. I absolutely approve. Hell no to Becton. Carter Warren at this point. Look, I'm a big Carter Warren fan, Jacob, but to me, he's got to be the sixth tackle. To me, he's someone that I can see groomed into a starting tackle. I really like his footwork. I thought that as the season progressed and he got more reps, he looked more comfortable. But to me, he's got to be your swing tackle. I think you need a swing tackle and a swing interior. My swing interior right now would be Connor McGovern. I think you can get for cheap. You can play the three interior positions. And then if I was look to the outside, I think Carr Warden, if you were to come in right now, Carr Warden's your swing tackle. And I'm happy with that. Max Mitchell offers some depth, a little versatility. You really hope that another year going into a third year, a big prove-it year, he's able to grow. I wouldn't hate him as a backup right now, but I do think that the overall front position have to get, and look, I get the Becton. I'm not a big fan of Becton as well. I think Jacob, you've been on my channel long enough. You know, I've been pretty harsh on Becton. Like, I'm not a Becton truther. I'm someone that's been incredibly critical. And look, I'm critical the kid because of the facts. Like, I think he's a good kid. I think he's worked incredibly hard the last years. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but I just look at the facts. I mean, when you're the most penalized offensive lineman and you've given up the most sacks, and before that, you played what? 3 quarters and 2 full seasons. Like, there I have questions. The only way I would bring him back again, and the way I laid it out, Jacob, was I had a lot of hypotheticals. And I think a lot has to go right to even bring Becton back. And even then, I don't think the Jets are thrilled that they're bringing him back. I like both the scenarios. And look, like, I know there are certain people that are down on McDonald, and I get the pick. And I think it's more that the Jet fans are pissed because of how that draft pick unfolded. And I've been on the record saying, look, I think McDonald can develop into good. I think he's shown you enough pop and enough speed off the edge that he can be a really good player. I know the Patriots pick killed the Jets when they traded up, when they allowed the Steelers to jump in front of the Jets. Of course, Belichick with one last troll. But again, at that time, it's pretty damning with the receivers that were on the board. Look, McDonald's going to have to be a really good player. But look, my biggest thing with Huff is you got to get something for him. I'm not opposed to Huff not being on this team. Ideally, I want him here. But if the Jets have made a decision that they have a number that they're comfortable going to and that they're not going to pass it, tag him and trade him. Get something. Because you've seen the market. Leonard Williams went for a second and a 5. Sweat went for a second and a 5. I would even be of the opinion, if I'm the Jets and I can get a late first-round pick, you could potentially do it, but you might have to kick something in there. If the Jets were to kick in a 5th or a 4th-round pick to get a better first-round pick, I would do it. There might be a team in the late 20s, and what that does to you in the 20s is it gives you a lot of flexibility. Maybe there's a guy in your top 15 on your board that falls in the 20s that you love and take. Like, for example, Jermaine Johnson. The Jets, it's clear he was a top 8 player on their board. He fell to 25. They were able to get him there. But it also leads to there might not be a top 15 guy on your board, but you can propel back a couple spots. Look, to me, the Jets have to be aggressive. If Huff's not going to be on this team, they have to make it work. Agreed and all. Warren is a death piece. Who's your ideal pick at 10, assuming Alt is gone, all the other tackles? It's tricky. Are you saying Fashanu's gone? Because I'm assuming, Jacob, you mean the top 2 tackles. I'm of the minority too. Like, if I was the Jets and you think Joe Alt or Fashanu, who I really think are going to be great tackles, and if you think they're franchise left tackles, I would be of the opinion, go up and get them. You have to. This year has to work. You got to go up and get them. But if it was me, Fuanga, I think, is a really good player, and I like him. I don't think he's a top 10 player. I think he's on that fringe. I just look at guys like Fuanga and Jones. Like, to me, the top 2 tackles are up here, and then you see there's like a little bit of a gap to Fuanga, and then between Fuanga and the rest of the tackles, and I don't see a huge gap. And I have the opinion, if I'm at 10 and I could jump back 5 spots, get a second-round pick, and take Jones from Houston or one of these kids, I don't think that's that much of a difference, and you're getting incredible value. Because, look, the Jets need pieces on offense. If they're able to get a second-round pick that turns into another starting offensive lineman, and then they can use that third-round wide receiver. If the Jets in the first 3 picks, if they trade back a couple spots, get a second, who knows? They may even get a third or a fourth, but let's just say they get at least a second and a third. Then they have the opportunity to get a tackle in the first round, use the day 2 to get a playmaker and another offensive lineman. That to me would be winning in this draft. It's a guessing game, of course, with free agent tackles and who's available in the draft. Well, Bakhtiari's available, so we'll see how that all goes. This offensive tackle and receiver class is deep. Yeah, like the hard part's going to be if one of the great playmakers, if Brock Bowers is there at 10, if one of the top 3 receivers is there, I think it's going to be hard to turn them down. But the thing with the Jets is, unfortunately, with this offense, there's too many holes, in my opinion, where, yeah, you can get one of those great receivers, but you need to address the offensive line. And I'd rather in this draft, instead of getting one elite player on day 1 and not really getting a lot on day 2, I almost feel the Jets are better with a B+ and 2 Bs. Like, you get a good offensive lineman, maybe not a great, but a starting offensive lineman. You get a nice wide receiver that can be a 3 or a 2 down the road. And if you come out with this with 2 starting offensive linemen, they don't have to be great. I'm not saying they even have to be Pro Bowls. If they are healthy and they're consistent and they're good offensive linemen, that to me is a winning draft. Tony Alexios, of course, very happy. So glad. I'm happy. Useless Thomas's bad history. I understand the frustration. Braden, man, I love you, Braden, but I got to go on a little bit of a tangent here. Like, look, I think Latham is a good prospect. I'm not taking anything with him. This is me personally, Braden. If you hate this, like, I can understand. Maybe you might think I'm weird, but here's my thought process. I think that there's certain schools in the draft that do positions well and do positions poorly. Alabama, if you were to say you were taking a wide receiver or a pass rusher, I'd say no problem. For whatever reason, their offensive linemen just have not made the change to the NFL. I don't know if it's just Alabama has maxed out every drop of potential, and that's the best they're going to be. And then the NFL, they have no room to grow. I don't know if it's because they grind them in the practice or the SEC. I don't know what it is. But I just look at the list of Alabama offensive linemen who every single year we view as top 10, top 15, top 20 players. And every year you're disappointed with them. Evan Neal, you're disappointed with. You're disappointed with countless offensive linemen. Then you see guys like Andrew Thomas from Georgia from the SEC looks great. Like, you just look at the rest of their class. To me, I just would avoid J.C. Latham. If the Jets pick him, I don't think it's a bad one. To me, Latham just feels like he'll be a plug-and-play player. He'll be solid, but I think he'll be one of those players that at the end of the day, he'll leave you wanting a little bit more as a first-round pick. And again, maybe it's just because I'm odd in how I'm looking at this, but I just have this feeling about Alabama tackles. And look, Brandon, you can disagree with me. You guys in the chat can disagree with me, but seriously, like, I'll wait. Give me the last great tackle that came out of Alabama. Like, if you look at their tackle history, it's a lot of bust, flat out, or guys that never reach their potential. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Laken had to go. I was late, but do you think this solidifies tip at guard? I'll go back to what I was saying earlier for guys joining us here late. It's kind of funny you bring this up because I did a video a couple weeks ago about Tippmann moving to guard, and I think I was really ahead of the game for Jets content creators. So now all of a sudden this last week, I've been seeing all these videos about, Tippmann moving to guard. I'm like, wonder where they got that from. But I think it solidifies one of two things. I think it solidifies they have a guard in mind, whether it's AVT or Tippmann. But here's the thing. I wouldn't just move Tippmann. I would go to Tippmann, and I would have asked him and said, look, you played guard, you played center. We really liked you at guard. We think you can be a better guard than a center, but what do you want? And the thing is, once you make a decision, either way, you stick with it. If Tippmann's your center, you don't yo-yo him. you keep him at center. If you make that decision, you're moving him to guard, you don't yo-yo him. You keep him at guard. You let him develop, because I do think that the player position swapping, and even Robert Sala's admitted, he feels that the AVT injury has come from bouncing him all over the offensive line. And I believe the Jets have made a decision internally that they have a guard penciled in. I don't know if it's Tittman. I don't know if it's AVT. But either way, I think they have a guard in mind on this team, because I don't see how they can go into it with two open guards. Who knows? They said Ohio State QBs are yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Jacob. I get what you're saying, but to me, I just look at the Alabama offensive linemen, and it just looks like they just don't seem to grow. They don't seem to project. Like, they're solid players in the NFL. Like, they're good players, but they're never like the first round picks you got. Like, I'm serious. Like, I'm racking my brain here. I can't think of a really good tackle from Alabama. I can't think of one. Like, I can think of all the receivers that have come through that school. I can think of defensive players. I can think of pass rushers. Heck, even I can think of quarterbacks that have come through that school. I can think of running backs that have come through that school. The one position from Alabama that you look that's had the hardest transition to the pros and has left you desiring more is their offensive line. And every year, it's like, well, Alabama's the best offensive line in the SEC, or one of the top 2 or 3 lines in the country. Yet when they go to the NFL, they just can't make the transition. I'd like to know how he goes against the speed rush, too. He's just in the middle of option. Look, the other thing, too, is I feel with Tittman, he is a better guard than a center, and I think Jacob's bringing that, too. I think he did, too. Like, you look at the grades, too. PFF, and I went into more, and if you want to check it out, go check out the Joe Tittman video I did. When Tittman was playing guard for the 4 games, now people might argue that, again, the offensive line was more intact at that point, which I get. But when you were looking at the grades he was getting from PFF, and again, I don't think it's the most accurate system, but I do think it's a nice ballpark. He was being rated as a top 5 guard in football in the 4 weeks. Not the right guard position, not among rookies, but guards. And one of the things I noticed about Tittman is the athleticism that he has and the size that he has. And one of the best plays of the year was the big Breece Hall run in Denver this year. That was sprung because he was able to get to the second level and make pancakes. And when you talk to guys around in the scouting community, some of them thought he'd be a better guard anyways, because you look at his size, he's 6'6". Now, he can still be a good center at 6'6", but it's hard when you're hunched over that ball and you have a sawed-off defensive tackle to really get that leverage, because the offensive line play is all about leverage. It's low man wins. When you're in a guard position, it's a little bit easier to get out of your stance and be able to get that leverage. When you're a center, one of the reasons center are usually sawed off, as I like to call it, like usually you see a center, like he's a little bit shorter than everyone else in the offensive line, is because he can get that leverage. Like, you see a lot of 6'2", 6'1", 6'3" centers. You don't see a lot of 6'5" centers in the National Football League. And I have the opinion that Tittman could be guard. But again, if you're the Jets, you have to talk to the kid. If he is gung-ho and he says, look, I want to be a guard, I think guard's my best position, or the Jets go to him, look, we think you can be a really good starting center. We think you could be a solid starting center. We think you could be a really great starting center. But we've seen you at guard. We're watching the film. We think you could be a Pro Bowl guard. And if you sell it to the kid right and say, look, we're not going to flip-flop you. Once we make this commitment, we're committed. Like, if the Jets sold to him, we think you could be a really good center, but we really think you could be a Pro Bowl guard. And let's put it this way. If you put that Pro Bowl next to your name as an offensive lineman in this league, you are getting paid. Whether it's from your team or another team, you are getting a nice stack of lettuce. So if that's the upside and they're selling that to Joe Tittman, then that's what they have to do. Jacob, Tittman AVT cards would be, I think it'd be good. And look, this is the other reason. There's a good crop of free agent centers this year. Lloyd Cushenberry, I think, is probably out of the Jets' price range, but the kid from Tennessee has some history with Keith Carter. There's some really good centers. And look, I think this draft has some really good centers, even guys that could move inside the center. I really love the kid Haynes from Sorry, not Haynes. I'm drawing a blank on him right now. I'll think of it later. The kid from UConn, the guard from, he can play center. I think he could fit right in. And you could probably get like one of those guys on round 3. Like, this is a really good interior. Like, everyone's talking about the tackles, and I get tackles because tackles are sexy. Tackles are the most important position on the line. But there's still a lot of good offensive linemen in this class. Like, there's a lot of good interior offensive linemen in this class, which should be exciting. Look, like, it's one of those things, like, certain years you need the draft to fall to you. Like, if you're a QB needed team, nothing's worse than when you get a draft with quarterbacks. When you get like the Malik Willis draft class, when you really need a quarterback. It worked that well for the Jets because what are the biggest things the Jets need? They need playmakers at wide receiver, but number 1 overall, they need offensive linemen. And they got a great offensive line class. This isn't like last year. They got a really good class in front of them, which I think is really exciting about. And look, if you're the Jets, I do think that makes it really interesting to see how this is all going to really turn out. And look, there's a lot of offensive linemen that I like in this draft. I think you have some really good ones. And look, I think you can get guys later in the first round. Here's a good one. That'd be Graham Barton, Jacob. I think he projects a little bit better to a guard, probably late first round pick. I think he's one of those ones, like, there's a couple guys that you think if they needed to be tackles, they could be fine at tackle. I think Fatanu from Washington fits in this a little bit too, where I think he doesn't have the great footwork, but I do think he can really stick out. Now, the one interesting player, and I think he's off the Jets' radar because I do think he's a project, but if he's sitting there on day 3, I would take a hard look at Kieran I can never say his last name. Kieran Amagani, the tackle from Yale. Yes, I know he's an Ivy League kid, but's got really good footwork, great athlete. And look, 6'5", 326 pounds. Look, I'm not saying a top day 2 pick or round 3, but if he's there in round 4 and you think he can develop into a starting tackle for your team, you have to take the opportunity. Look, the Jets, and at worst case scenario, if the Jets have too much depth on the offensive line, that wouldn't be a bad thing. I mean, we've seen it the last few years. They need as much depth as possible. J-Max, I think the biggest reason is 2 reasons, J-Max. I think the first reason is, actually, I could say 3 reasons. Number 1, it opens up immediate cap. They have 24 going to free agency. Number 2, I think for potential free agents, it shows there's an opening at guard. But number 3, this now with the cap increase and with this, Bryce Huff has said he's looking to get about $20 million a year. I think the tag, correct me if I'm wrong, is 23.1 for edge rushers this year. So now all of a sudden, the Jets, because you can't make that tag unless you have the cap room, all of a sudden, the Jets have that cap room. So, all right, bring back. So I would do it, but as a backup. I think McGovern, if he has to start a couple games, is fine, but I wouldn't have him be your everyday starting guard. Now, if I think he'd be better as your swing. Like, if you brought him in as the backup center and guard to all 3 positions, like, to me, he's your swing guard. You have Warren as your swing tackle. Like, that's how I would approach it with McGovern. I don't hate him as a starter, but, the other thing, too, I would look at with McGovern is if Tippmann is moving to guard, I bring back McGovern to start. But if they draft a kid in the day 2 for center, if it's like Tippmann last year, if he's ready to go and McGovern can hand it off, great. I don't think McGovern's a bad center. Like, if you have to move Tippmann to guard and have McGovern center, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I know this is Jet fans thing they want to hear, but I can see their defense slipping if they don't get a run-stuffing D tackle when Al Woods tore ACL, took a backseat. Look, and I think they're going to try to bring back a couple of their defensive tackles. But, Jacob, the one benefit the Jets have, and I know it's not sexy, is the Jets have some picks on day 3. I'm trying to remember what they let me look that up really quick because I know they have a fourth. I think they have a couple picks. Uh I know they have a couple picks on day 3. If you give me 1 second, I promise I will get to you. Here we go. So the Jets right now have 2 fourth round picks. They have 112 and 114. They do not have a fifth rounder. They have 1 6 and they have 3 seventh round picks. So they could, if they really wanted to, from 112, bump back into the late first, into the third round, because to go up wouldn't be horrible from there. But I mean, they do have some of those picks. I think the 2 fourth rounds are really key for this team. Uh, I think you can get a run stuffing defensive tackle later in this draft. There's a couple of guys that I really like that's as defensive tackles for this team. And look, defensive players, you can get good players on day 3 because everyone wants so many offensive players are such a rush and premium on tackles, on wide receivers, on quarterback, push the board. And it's definitely some guys can go to as well. Let's go. J Mac. Connor Williams. I like Hunt the best because he's the youngest. And he's playing a very similar system with the Dolphins to what the Jets want to run in terms of San Francisco. Yeah, they really like him. I liked him too. I talked about it. He can also play guard as well. He's a starter, a versatile starter. I think he's going to be someone he looks at. Well, yeah, 3 seventh round picks. They're all I think they're compensation picks or something, or they're really late. The Jets literally are going to close out the draft. They have 253, 254, and Mr. Relevant 257 right now. So I don't know, maybe package 2 of those and get back into the late 6 if you really want. I think if anything, they're going to be like a sweetener. Like if the Jets want a late third round pick, they're going to give up 112 and try to throw in like one of those 7s to get up there. Or with their 6th round pick, they try to sneak in the back end of 5. Maybe they package 1 or 2 of those 7th rounders to go up in and get those as well. They need to use next year's 2 to move up this year. I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if they do that, J-Max. I wouldn't rule it out the table. Look, this staff is desperate. I could see that. Look, and I'm of the opinion too, if it costs me a 2nd round pick to get Joe Alt or Olo Fashanu, the 2 tackles, I'm for it. I would even go as far as to say if it costs me, if they are that confident, they think that they are the left tackles that I think they can potentially be, I wouldn't even bat an eye if the Jets had to give up the 3rd rounder and the 2nd round. Again, a lot of people say that's a lot, but again, they still get the 1st round next year. They're all in for this year as well. They need to win. And look, if you find a franchise left tackle, it's worth a lot. Look at what the Texans gave up for Laramie Tunsil. It's a lot for a left tackle. But if you feel they're one of those 2 guys and they're sitting there at 7 or 8 and you might have to give up a couple picks, I would go for it. Like I would really go for it. Oh yeah, the Jacob, we clearly have one of the best communities, and it's funny too because I think we have this like little community too because there's this like national perception about the Jets, and I get it being not in the playoffs for 13 years, and I think a lot of Jet fans they're just looking for good content that isn't basically trolling them. And look, that's where I am. I'm not going to troll the Jets. I'm also not going to look through it with Jet color glasses too. If I see something that I think needs to be fixed, I'll call it out on them. But I tend to be a little bit on the optimistic side. But if I'm the Jets, and I'm like J-Max right here, J-Max trade 10 next year, 2nd and 4th to the Giants for 6 and draft all. That's not horrible. The biggest problem is going to be what the board is. If some miracle on the top 3 quarterbacks is there for the Giants, it doesn't matter what the Jets want. They're not giving that pickup. Now, technically, if you look at the trade chart, it's only a 300-point difference between pick 6 and pick 10. So the Jets technically could give up the 3rd rounder and maybe an additional pick this year. I think if you give up 1, a 3, and a 3, you could maybe get it done. But again, it depends on what the Giants want. And well, let me also throw this out here. If let's say the Jets tag Huff hypothetically, but we get to the draft and nothing's really happening with Huff. What if the Jets go to the Giants and basically say, look, you guys have a lot of draft capital. The Giants, if you don't know, have 2 second-round picks. They have 47. They have 49. They have 39. Sorry, 39 and 47. What if the Jets basically went up and said, look, you need a pass rusher. We need this tackle. There's not a player you love here. And I know Jet fans would cringe probably at this, but if it gets you Joe Alt, I'd consider it. If you swap with the Giants go back to 10, Jets go up to 6, Jets trade Huff and let's say a late day 3 pick, but then they, in return, from not only moving up, get one of the Giants' second-round picks. Like if the Jets were to trade, let's say 10, one of the 4s that they have 112 and 114, so there really isn't a difference, and Huff to move up 4 spots in the draft, but also recoup a second-round pick. So you get your franchise tackle. And then if you, especially if you can get pick 39, that gets you in striking distance of the first round. And the Jets still have that other 4th rounder in their back pocket. They have their 3rd rounder still in their back pocket. If there's a top 20 receiver or a top 20 offensive lineman, like let's say maybe the Oklahoma tackle is falling into the 20s, or they really love Jackson Powers Johnson that much that they'll go and get him in the 20s because Tippmann's going to be starting at guard. I mean, the Jets have to be creative and versatile. So I know a lot of people are going to say that's crazy, but I think everything has to get on the board. Let's say they get Dallas left tackle and Fashanu is on the board, and would you pass on it? So if okay, I get what you're saying. If they get the Dallas left tackle and Fashanu is on the board, I would get Fashanu. Look, because as much as I like Tyron Smith, he gets hurt all the time. You have a potential stalwart. Worst case scenario, Fashanu, you can play him at right tackle for a year, or he gets groomed behind arguably one of the best left tackles we've seen in the NFL, and he can maybe step right in year 2 and be an elite left tackle. If he's your I think he's a franchise left tackle. If he's there at 10, I'm taking him, because if he can be my left tackle for a decade, even if he sits for a year, I'm doing it. I'm absolutely doing it. Especially because Smith's going to get likely hurt. He's averages like 11, 12 games a season. So you're probably going to have to put Fashanu in there for at least a couple games. So, and my thing too is I would rather have the Jets overload an offensive line and maybe thin at tight end, thin at running back, thin at receiver. Because you know what you can get at a trade deadline? You could get a tight end. You could get a wide receiver at the trade deadline. You could sign a free agent wide receiver. You know what you're not finding at a trade deadline? You're not finding an offensive lineman. You're not. So, yeah. So me and J Max sharing a brain with Huff. Now I'm surprised. I'm actually surprised you guys the fact that I mentioned Huff to the Giants. Like people are like, I'm surprised there hasn't been a riot in the chat right now. There hasn't been people writing pitchforks or anything to me there as well. That would be perfect. The problem though is the Jets are not getting Jackson Powers the second round because they are so far back in the 3rd. They're going to have to trade up so much to get him. And I just don't think, even if he gets the second round, he might even get to the second round, J-Max. To me, you have to recoup a second round pick. Now, if you trade Huff and got a second round pick, sure, but I don't know if he's going to be there. Hunt, I would add over Zeitler. I think Hunt's a better tackle. I mean, better guarding younger. I think he fits the system better. Calvin Ridley, I'd looked at too. Looks, hey, Sauce Gardner's being a GM, so hopefully Sauce can lure in some of these guys as well. Do you really think there's any real shot with Donovan Smith and his Jets comment? I know he's not a top left tackle, but him and Fuaga helps solidify the line. The first problem is the Jets have to get to Fuaga. I mean, Fuaga has to get to the Jets. I mean, that is kind of the first thing. And I don't even think that might not even happen because there's a chance those guys off the board. Like everyone's just assuming the Giants are going to pass. The Giants also have a god-awful offensive line. Who's to say that they're not going to take one of the tackles? Donovan Smith, look, I think he's an okay player. I like the comments he wants to come home. I don't think he's that good of a player. I don't. And he's 30 years old. I don't know about you guys. I almost would rather take a flyer on Bakhtiari in a 1-year deal and draft one of the kids to sit behind him than him. Because I think at 30, I still think he's going to be looking for a multi-year contract, and I wouldn't give it to him. 1-year deal, maybe. Yeah, I mean, they traded with the Giants before. It wouldn't be off the table. So I would consider all options. And look, I do think there's going to be a huff market. And the other interesting thing too with the tag, it could also help in a weird way to hold on to him to the draft because, again, a lot of teams are going to look in free agency. But maybe there's 2 or 3 teams that miss out on free agency and don't get that pass rushing or send back looking at this draft class going, gee, I don't know. And all of a sudden, Bryce Huff is available. And like I said, I would push for a first round pick if possible. Like the Eagles are a good example. The Eagles are already having issues. One of their pass rushers wants a trade. Could you maybe trade Huff and a 4 and maybe something else to get pick 22? I mean, Green Bay has had a lot of success, but could they use another pass rusher? I mean, Arizona's interesting at 27. They have that 27th pick in the draft. They already have, as we know, a top 5 pick. Could that be something where Arizona, who's got a ton of draft capital in this class, could really use a pass rusher? Is that a pick that they could use? Detroit's another one. I wouldn't rule out Detroit. I mean, pick 29. They're right on the cusp. I think they have a good defense. But if you were offered Bryce Huff in a late round pick, I think that there would be a market for him, even for a late first round pick. I do think you have to kick something in, but I do think that there could be something there as well. Giants need a right tackle. Best case then is use trade back and then take Funga. Yeah, they could do that, but again, he might not be there. That's the risk you have at trading back. I mean, look at the Jets. They trade back 2 spots, missed out on a tackle last year. I mean, trading back, I know it looks great on paper, but the risk is you lose on the players you might not get. Fong gets a lot of comps to worse. At least, the very least, he'll be an absolute mar. Look, he's going to be a right tackle. I don't love him as a left tackle. Look, and again, if the Jets take Fung at 10, I'm not going to hate it. I think he's a capable day 1 right tackle starter. My biggest question is the left side. I think all in Fuashu are great left tackles. The only thing I would Funga is like, I think he's a good player. But where I see the difference between tackles 1 and 2, I think there's a gap to 3. But then between 3 and 7, I don't think there's a significant gap. And if you can get an extra pick by dropping back 4 or 5 spots and still getting one of those great tackles, I would do it. If the Giants trade back with the Jets, they take Fung or Dallas Turner or Doomsday. Jets need to get ahead of the Titans, Joe Alt. Yeah, I mean, you look right now, Titans are taking a tackle. Like, they're taking a tackle without question. Yeah. Look, and even other teams, like, we don't talk about them taking tackles, but Arizona today is putting out that Kyler Murray is their franchise quarterback. If Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't there at 4, could they take a tackle? Chargers, could they take a tackle? Jim Harbaugh loves having a great offensive line. The Giants' offensive line has been terrible. Could they take a tackle? I mean, it's not their number 1 need, but even the Bears in front of the Jets at 9, everyone's just saying they're going to take a playmaker. The Bears did not put an offensive line in front of Justin Fields and got him killed. If they get Caleb Williams and they have a chance to get, like, let's say Fashan, who's there at 9, I would freaking sprint to the podium because I get the number 1 quarterback and a top 2 tackle and top 10 picks. I'm selling for that every day of the week, including Sunday. How pissed would you? So I have an opinion of Bowers. I love Bowers. I think Bowers is a great player. I think Bowers can be a really dynamic player in the NFL. The problem I have with the Bowers on the Jets is the following. I don't think it's the biggest need, although he would be their number 2 target, which would help Garrett Wilson. My thing is, if you have a great tight end, it's not just how talented they are, it's how you use them. The Chiefs know how to use Travis Kelce. The Lions learned how to do Laporta this year. But there's another great tight end who should easily be a top 4 tight end, but this whole year we're going, well, what the heck's going on with him? That's Kyle Pitts. Atlanta didn't know how to use him. And let me ask you, Jets fans, do you trust that this offensive staff, who I don't think any of us believe in, except that Aaron Rodgers is going to basically be the offensive coordinator next year, do you really think that this offensive staff is going to get the most out of that kid? A receiver, maybe, because with Bowers, he's not a huge tight end. He's not going to be a mauler. You have to create opportunities for him. You're going to have to move around the field. You're going to have to be creative. And one of the things we've seen with this Jets offensive staff, they're not creative. Now, again, if they pick him, I still think it's a dynamic playmaker. I would be excited. I think it's some great number 2 that goes along with Garrett Wilson, and that Aaron Rodgers will find a way to make it work. But the problem is, who's blocking? If it's over Fashanu, I'd be pissed because I think Fashanu could be a left tackle. And look, I get you. There's rare opportunity to get a tight end, but you know it's hard to find a left tackle, a really great one. I mean, you look at last year, the Lions found a great tight end in round number 2. George Kittle was a day 2 find. You can find elite tight ends. And look, Jeremy Rucker is a nice progressing rookie. You have a young tight end. You have Tyler Conklin, who is a very productive tight end. I mean, the Jets have productive tight ends. That's not their issue. Their issue is they couldn't block anything. I mean, they couldn't stop anything. It was basically a sieve on the offensive line last year. That's why you need a tackle. Yeah, he's a right tackle, but again, if he's a starting right tackle, it doesn't matter. He's really good. And again, if they find like Smith in free agency and they want to go with Funga there, I'm okay with that. But it depends on how they, again, do in the free agency period, because they have to hit. They cannot miss. Yeah, like I think you get a lot of sentiment. And that's my thing with Bowers is with the right staff and the right coach and the right system, I think he could be elite. But it's one of those things. It's like Kyle Pitts in Atlanta. Can you figure out how to use him? Can you figure out how to play with the toy correctly? Because there's going to be instructions. You have to read the instruction manual. Because if you don't, then you just look foolish. Because all year this year, we're like, how is Kyle Pitts not getting targets? How is Kyle Pitts not being utilized? How is like arguably the most talented tight end we've seen in years basically wasting away in Atlanta? Like they don't know how to use him. Like Detroit knows how to use their tight ends. San Francisco knows how to use their tight ends. Miami knows how to use tight ends. Like a lot of teams, like you put Bowers on a team with some creativity and a good quarterback. The Jets have the good quarterback in Rodgers, but I just don't trust this staff. That's going to do it for this episode of Rich Sports Talk. Of course, the big news, the Jets cutting Laken Tomlinson, but it does save them 8.1 in cap space and now gives them $24 million before heading to free agency. But all that and more is coming up. We will have a free agency preview coming up, a lot more, and all the latest breaking news on the New York Jets, and of course, NFL draft coverage over the next few months. Make sure to give us a like, bash that subscribe button, so you don't miss any of the latest content here on Rich Sports Talk. If you join us after this video, make sure to comment down below, and we will get to your questions in the next video. But until next time, I'm your host, Nolan Rich, and this is Rich